Good morning. How are you? Can I just have a little bit of real talk? Women of Florida, do we just give up on the hair? I am joining you from Montana, where I live, and I have a lot of things that I love about Montana, but this is reminding me that low humidity summers are pretty high up on that list. So if you need a location to visit soon, I recommend it. Now, one of the things I really love about Montana is that there are trails everywhere. And not just like drive 15 minutes to a trailhead. They are embedded in neighborhoods, in communities, in urban centers. Case in point, this is my trail that goes through my neighborhood. This is the obligatory trail running buddy photo to lift you up this morning. But when I first moved to Montana when I was 19, this was a bit of a culture shock that everyone was so active. Because I grew up in Missouri, and more specifically, the geographical region that is better known as Missouri. So we are really like true Midwesterners that excel more at the making and consumption of casseroles than we do at any kind of athletic endeavor. So I was really caught off guard by just how very active everyone was. And I'm talking like not just outdoorsy in the go camping occasionally, but having entire personalities built around outdoor recreational activities, skiing, mountain biking, trail running, hiking, etc. My 19-year-old self realized if I want to live here and fit in and take part of these activities, I should probably think about being more active. I should probably think about getting in shape. But as you can imagine, I was not very athletic as a child, so I really didn't know what I was doing. And I set myself a very arbitrary goal, but I thought, if I could just run 3 miles without stopping, I will be in shape. That will be achieving fitness. So I start running. It feels like a hard slog. I'm huffing and puffing. I'm working away at it. And eventually, after a few months, I can meet this goal of running 3 miles. And I come to all my very fit, active friends, ready to be congratulated for having achieved fitness. And their response is basically like, oh, well, that's cute. What are you going to do next? How about a 10K? Oh, and you know what? You should probably think about weight training. And while you're at it, you'll probably need to think about your mobility, so maybe add in a couple of yoga sessions a week. Basically, I thought I had reached the goal, and instead, they gave me new, slightly more annoying goals. It started to feel like, is this what it's like to be in a cult? What I realized the hard way is that being fit, being active, isn't a one-time goal that you can achieve. It's not a destination. Instead, it is a lifelong commitment. Now, these days, 25-ish years later, I am still running and still enjoying it, but I obsess a lot less now about my fitness, about my running pace, and I spend a lot more time obsessing about data. And that's because I lead a team of researchers at NWEA. And a big part of our charge is to generate the evidence that helps our organization understand how to create the best possible outcomes for students. Now, I take my role very seriously because I know that a lot of the trust that you place in us, our partners place in us, rests on the credibility of that evidence. That's true now more than ever before, as we are getting harder questions as an industry about effectiveness and impact and evidence. Frankly, I think that conversation has been a long time coming, and I deeply welcome it. But what I have started to realize is that sometimes we think about credibility the same way that my naive 19-year-old self thought about fitness. We think about it as a destination to be arrived at once, and then something you can move on from. But instead, I'd like to offer that credibility is not a destination, it is an active commitment. And that is a commitment to continually be asking ourselves whether or not we are confident and that we know that the improvements that we're seeing are real, whether they can be replicated, whether they can be sustained, whether they can be scaled. Because it's not enough to know your product, your service worked once. We need to know that it has those properties, that it can create growth for every student. This is ultimately HMH's mission, and I think it is powerful. I think it probably resonates with a lot of you. I would also like to offer, though, that I think it's missing something rather crucial. Because when we think about creating growth for students, it isn't a dichotomous yes-no question. Did the student grow or not? Instead, the key is asking ourselves whether that student grew enough to move them towards the meaningful outcomes that we care about. And when we think about growth this way, it becomes clear that it isn't just creating growth for every student, it's creating meaningful growth. The challenge, of course, is that it's not always obvious what meaningful growth looks like. You, like me, I assume, spend a lot of time looking at assessment data. All data nerds are welcome. This is a safe space. I have to tell you, last year, when I was on my way home from Fusion, I boarded my plane. I make it halfway back, and I start to hear clapping and cheering, "We love data." It was a whole row of teachers that had come to one of my sessions, and I have to say, it was probably the most meaningful career moment of my life. Ready to retire. But back to looking at data. So we spend a lot of time looking at assessment data, and one of the ways that we frequently contextualize and interpret our data, our students' achievement and growth, is by using norms. Now, norms are a really powerful tool. They help us understand what is typical across the nation. But I also want to point out that norms can lead us into a subtle trap. And we have a tendency to take what is average, what is typical, as the benchmark for what is good. But norms don't tell us where students should be. They are not prescriptive. They describe where students are. Let me illustrate what I mean here. Let's take an example of a student that starts the fall at the 25th percentile for his achievement. Now imagine that we track the student between fall and spring, they take their map growth test again, and by spring we see that they have grown, and they have grown at an average rate. They've grown at the 50th percentile. Now in many cases, we would interpret this as a success story. This student made growth that is typical for students like him. But let me ask you, where will this student end the year in terms of his spring achievement percentile? He will remain at the same percentile that he started the year. His RIT score increased, to be sure, but average growth means maintaining status. And for this student, if we want to push him towards a meaningful benchmark, for instance, reaching state proficiency, it would take well above average growth to get him there. Now let me make this a little bit less theoretical, and let's apply it in the context of real data. And I want to talk about some research that my team did. And in this pretty simple study, what we did was follow students between kindergarten and third grade. We wanted to look at one of the most major milestones in a student's early academic trajectory, and that is the percentage of students that go on to reach proficiency by the end of third grade. What we did was take students according to their entering kindergarten achievement level and group them into quintiles. The question here is simple. Across these groups, what percentage of students go on to reach proficiency by the end of third grade? Now, let's start here. I'm going to build a little bit of drama. We're going to look at our highest achieving kindergartners, students in the highest quintile that came into kindergarten at the 81st percentile or above. Before I show you the data, I'd invite you to make a prediction about what percentage of these students you think reached proficiency by the end of third grade. What we see is it's about 80% of those students in math and about 75% in reading. I wonder if this surprises you. Because on one hand, those seem like really high percentages, right? Those are high numbers. But if we think about the inverse, Fully 1 in 4 of our highest achieving kindergartners did not reach proficiency in 3rd grade in reading. That's a fairly stunning number. If we look to the next percentile group, these are our students who are still well above average, between the 61st and 80th percentile. Here, it's roughly half. And I have to say, this is where these data really grabbed my attention, because this is a group of kindergartners that we are not flagging as at risk of not reaching proficiency, right? They're coming in solidly above average. And yet, the likelihood that those students went on to reach proficiency was about a coin toss. If we look at our middle quintile, here we see about 1 in 3 reached proficiency. And I think you can anticipate where this is going as I show you the lowest 2 achieving quintiles. I find these results genuinely sobering. That for our lowest achieving kindergartners, about 1 in 10 goes on to reach proficiency. If we stick with that lowest group for a moment, the next question we wanted to know was, how does this change over time? Do those odds change as we move through kindergarten and into 1st grade? By the end of kindergarten, the spring of kindergarten, those numbers are about half, and half again as we move to the end of 1st grade. What I find striking here is not just that these numbers are so low, but also that that window closes so quickly and so dramatically. What is 1 in 10 of our entering fall kindergartners becomes about 1 in 50 by the end of 1st grade. What I want you to take away is not the bleakness of those likelihoods, but how quickly that window closes. Our window of opportunity to support these students is early as possible. What this tells us is that there is a large group of students that are going to need above average growth to really change their trajectories in a meaningful way. What this also tells us is that a student can be growing and still not on a trajectory that meaningfully changes their futures. Now, I've just showed you data from the broad population of students, several 100,000 kindergartners. But the next question I wanted to ask was, knowing a teacher doesn't teach 300,000 students, they teach 1 classroom, I wanted to really better understand what this challenge looks like from the perspective of 1 teacher in 1 classroom. So that's where we're going to go next. And here what we looked at, we took the typical 5th grade math classroom and wanted to know, within any given classroom, what is the percentage of students that are on track to exceed proficiency versus on track to reach proficiency versus off track for proficiency? And what we found is that nearly 3/4 of students in the typical math classroom are off track for proficiency. And what's more, if we try and understand, okay, what level of effort, what level of growth would get these students back on track, the average is about 2.7 years of growth. I want to just pause here for a moment to let that sink in and take the perspective of a teacher. Someone we're asking to meet the needs of a huge range of entering achievement levels, to accelerate for the challenge, the advanced students, to create meaningful, very accelerated learning for students coming in off track, and to do it all at one time. And the students that need this level of dramatic growth, it's not just a couple, it's not just a handful, it is the majority of students in the classroom. What these data indicate to me is that expecting any 1 teacher to fully meet this range and depth of needs simultaneously borders on impossible. As I was working on this talk, I worried deeply about bringing you these data because I realized it is not a sunny start to the day. And I was worried that there are a couple of ways this could go off the rails and a couple of interpretations you could leave with that I certainly don't want. The first being that the scale of the challenge is so immense as to be insurmountable. I certainly am not suggesting we just shrug our shoulders and give up. The other conclusion I worried people would take away is that I'm suggesting this is the fault of teachers, that if teachers were just working harder, doing more, layering on more interventions, then we wouldn't be here. But if anything, the more I worked on this talk, the more it started to feel like a deeply nerdy love letter to teachers. I want you to feel seen, that we have tasked you with the impossible, and yet you continue to show up every day with a smile on your face, trying your damnedest for those kids. I do want to leave you with a lens to approach the next few days together and think about what this reality requires from us. Over the next couple of days, you'll have the opportunity to connect with new colleagues, get exposed to new ideas, and think about how you're going to bring those home to your students. Here's the lens I want you to take with you. For our teachers, if we all agree that this mission is worthwhile of creating meaningful growth for every student, I invite you to really interrogate how you're going to know what kind of growth your students need, what kind of growth your students need. And to interrogate deeply that almost default assumption that we tend to have that sets average growth as the goal for all. Because as we have seen, average growth is not enough for many students to put them on a path to success. For the rest of us, the question I want you to carry across these 3 days together is, are we giving educators the support they need to create this meaningful growth? And I'm not asking that question just to school leaders, I extend it to myself and my colleagues. Are we doing everything in our power to equip students and teachers with the tools and the resources that they need to create these gargantuan levels of growth that are necessary? Because if we truly believe that our mission is to create growth for every student, then we have to be equally serious about understanding what that meaningful growth looks like and equally committed to supporting the people we're tasking with creating it. Thank you so much.